Welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week, we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, you're up this week.
Yep.
What are you bringing to the table today?
I am bringing an article called Organizing the Already Mobilized, which is part 4 of Inquest's Abolitionist Lessons from the Prison Belt series.
Yes.
And this series is a set of conversations between Lydia Pelot-Hobbs, Judah Schept, Craig Gilmore, and Ruth Wilson Gilmore about the different elements of organizing for abolition. And this article starts with a great introduction, so I'm just going to steal it for my introduction.
Nice.
Yep. I guess it's borrowing.
There you go.
Yeah. So they say, quote, building a front of people with enough power to block carceral expansion projects requires scanning a social landscape for issues that people are already mobilizing on and thinking creatively about how to persuade organized people that a credible plan to win what they seek does not go through incarceration. We offer some examples from our organizing experiences where people in motion in unions, workers' centers, community radio stations, neighborhood associations, regional water districts came to see their priorities as threatened by carceral spending, choking off other life-enhancing investments and paths to freedom. In most of these settings, self-identified abolitionists are few and far between, and so we discuss the ways of operating, balancing the unproductive impulse to be perfectionist scolds with the political clarity to both transform pro-punishment consciousness and avoid resolutions that consolidate our opponent's strength for the next round. So I don't have anything to add to that. So let's get into it. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you borrowed that intro. It was a great one. And I think it really set the stage for the conversation that they had.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the conversation we're going to have. I thought this was another really great piece and conversation in this undeniably incredible series by Inquest. I actually feel like it was a nice continuation of some of the conversation we got to have last week with those pieces in the Forge. And, you know, it's the idea that solidarity is so important to the success of our movements and our organizing is such an important lesson here in this conversation. I know that you wanted to share Ruth Wilson Gilmore's story about all of this in the context of her work with SEIU Local 1000 Union and their fight against that Delano 2 prison in California.
Yep.
So I'm going to let you do that.
Okay.
But one of the things she talks about much later in their conversation, I found really fascinating about their work. They found an unlikely ally and an unlikely place. And so I wanted to share this because I thought it was really great context. So she says, quote, just because you don't expect it doesn't mean it's impossible. When we organized the lawsuit to stop the Delano 2 prison, we got a sign-on from the regional water district. The guy who was the district's chief staffer was not for us, but he was against the threat to the water table and was willing to put into writing everything that was wrong with building a prison, which is a city, onto the diminishing water table of an already existing city. That was an unexpected, but also completely sensible connection.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a huge takeaway from this piece, right? Like there are lots of places and spaces where people are aligned with our goals for whatever reason. In this case, this guy is thinking about the use of, tying into the water system there and the environmental impact of that. And so part of the lesson that Ruth and everyone in this piece shares about all of this is the power of harnessing that in the work for prison abolition. Like where are your allies? How can you work together towards a goal, whatever your goal may be. And I just really appreciated that lesson, that example specifically.
Yeah, and finding the people who aren't necessarily for you and with you, but they're with you because they're against whatever it is that you're against, and finding those allies in purpose, even if it's temporary.
Yes.
I thought that was a really powerful lesson too.
Yeah.
And connected to that, as you mentioned, the first story here illustrates, I think, the ways that we can connect dots between abolitionist policies and union organizing.
Yeah.
And so Ruth Wilson Gilmore talks about SEIU 1000, which does not represent prison guards or parole officers, but does represent other workers who were in the prison system.
Yes.
And so in this story, she's talking about how some of the union members were brought into the work of blocking the construction of a new prison.
Right.
So Ruth says, quote, in the long campaign to stop the Delano 2 prison, we had talked to many different kinds of people. And inevitably, our audiences included members of that union, in particular, people who worked in the prisons as teachers. What caught their attention was our analysis of the state's changing budget priorities, and they noticed how those changes were making it harder and harder to do their jobs. We were not arguing to support prison education, but rather showing in as many ways as we could how the social welfare capacities of the state were shrinking everywhere. And I think this illustrates first the concept of organized abandonment that Ruth coined and has used to describe the ways that social welfare from the state has consistently declined over the last 4 to 5 decades and beyond.
Yes.
For some people, that social welfare has never really existed.
Right? Yeah.
And so the organized abandonment of the state to say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're never going to do it because you guys are on your own.
Right.
That's a whole process that's happening. But it also illustrates how abolitionist analysis can point out to even people who are working in the prison system that ultimately that system isn't working for them either.
Absolutely.
The system that's cutting you a check and is putting a roof over your head and food on the table, ultimately that's all going to go away for you too.
Yes.
Because you're going to become an expendable piece of the death-making system that is the prisons.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so again, it's that piece about finding your allies and finding the ways to get other folks involved and engaged in your work and in your organizing and helping them realize the writing on the wall. In this case, the other folks that are non-prison guards who are working in these systems. And yeah, that was the sort of first conversation. That was how Ruth opened their conversation, was sharing this example. And I think it really showcased how important that political education work is and helping folks make sense of and make connections to what's actually happening in these systems. And as you say, how they're not for you and how you ultimately will be expendable if it is allowed to continue as such. So that was really great. Craig Gilmore then builds off of that great example that Ruth shared and talked about and highlighted what new organizers need to be or should be thinking about. And he offered some really great guiding questions for new organizers to consider as they start their work. And I wanted to share those questions here. So he says, some of the questions that can guide them in trying to figure out where to put their limited resources in terms of reaching out to the already organized are, who is this project going to with? Who's going to be hurt if this project happens? And who's already organizing in a way that I might be able to go to them and pitch the idea that if the jail expansion happens or if the detention center is built, issues they care and campaign about and people they're working with are going to be hurt. In the case of SEIU in California, we approached them with a message of they're shrinking public goods in order to build more prisons, which a couple of prison teachers had heard at one of our many public presentations. It wasn't so much that we did outreach to SEIU. They found us. Militants within the union found us. But I think people who haven't yet been approached by organized forces need to be able to think about, who should I be approaching? Who can I call? And what kind of pitch can I make to convince them to join this fight? And so, again, I think that's why this piece and this series is so important, because these lessons, I think, for both seasoned and new abolitionists and organizers are so incredible and so super helpful in this work.
Yeah, and concisely put and wrapped up in a story to give you context of why it's important.
Absolutely.
And I think that's been one of the really amazing pieces of reading through this series and learning from it. So definitely appreciate all that.
Yeah.
So another thing that Ruth mentioned was about school teachers.
Oh, yeah.
And so she says, quote, I could tell a story about elementary and secondary school teachers in California with whom some abolitionists built a statewide organization. They crafted curricula, involved kids in lobbying on their own behalf, and developed a workshop to train teacher union members in any state who might be outraged by the pipeline draining public money and young people from schools to prisons.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, and it sounds like an incredible project, one, and a curriculum I want to read, two.
Yes.
So, and it reminds me of that toolkit we talked about, I think a couple years back, about abolition lessons for kids, which is called, and is still available, In Our Own Hands by Rania El Mugamar. And I think it's really important, both that toolkit, but also this curricula, to help people get more skills in organizing, because there's so much work to do in organizing.
Yes.
So starting with kids is, I think, really important.
Yes.
Because even if they're not going to use the skills for, I don't know, abolitionist organizing or trying to stop Delano to prison or what have you, having the organizing skills to be able to put together a team of people and identify strengths and weaknesses in a team and work together with people to accomplish something. I think
powerful.
It's powerful. And I think having more people have those skills fundamentally changes the way that a lot of things operate in our society. So yeah, let's get as many people trained up to pitch in as possible for all the work that needs to be done,
including the kids. Right? Yeah, I love that, giving them those skills, but also she talked about kids lobbying on their behalf, and like that's a tangible skill that kids need as well, to be able to speak up for themselves and what they want. And we have seen that in lots of examples through lots of the media we've consumed, how kids have been effective in this work as well. And so I said it before, but I think that's why pieces in conversation like this are so important, and resources like the ones you've mentioned to train people up to do this work. It's so important. I thought one of the most incredible stories in this conversation, and that's saying a lot because there are a ton, was one that Judah Schept shared, because it highlighted how sometimes our comrades come from unlikely places again, right? And so Judah shared this story about the early days of the fight against the proposed federal prison in Lecter County, Kentucky, and how it was young people who were working as DJs at an independent radio station who became politicized and really central to the fight against the prison that was proposed to be built there. And so the DJs were on this radio show called Calls from Home, and they aired song requests from incarcerated individuals. And then they also broadcasted messages of love and support from the loved ones of those incarcerated people so that they could hear them while they were in prison, which was, just kind of incredible to hear about. Yeah. But Judah says specifically, quote, DJs for the show were politicized by the work of mediating between loved ones on the outside and people who were locked up, but also by the first iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement. They had placed a Black Lives Matter sign in the window at WMMT and started getting harassed by the Whitesburg police. Through the radio show, Black Lives Matter, and their own subjection to police harassment, these young people had arrived at a political analysis that could easily identify USP Lecter as an expression of the same forces that had killed Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, and Freddie Gray. They began organizing as the Lecter Governance Project, and in conversation with other Southern movement folks, devised the hashtag #Our444Million hashtag, asking what other needs could be met by the $444 million allocated to building the prison, which would become an invaluable framing device in the campaign and beyond. In fact, their work became instrumental to the eventual defeat of the first USP Lecter prison proposal. Today, many years later, as we again fight attempts to build a federal prison in Lecter County, the players have shifted, in no small part because of what happened the first go-round. Yeah, and I just love that idea that these young people, just kind of doing their thing as DJs, essentially got radicalized because they cared, right? They listened to these stories. They cared about the real people who had been impacted by the criminal punishment system, and they did something about it. They got themselves engaged in the work, and I just felt that was incredible.
Also appreciate them putting together that show and hosting it and being open to that being a part of their political education process.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about application.
Okay.
How do we apply what we've learned to our day-to-day lives and work? At one point, Lydia is talking about a story from New Orleans, and she says, quote, "This brings to mind another story related to the Orleans Parish Prison Reform Coalition. At one point in the campaign, organizers identified the need to organize the Mid-City Neighborhood Organization, where the jail is located. And they were like, we know their orientation is going to be against a jail expansion through NIMBY, not in my backyard, politics, as if the main harms of the jail were the risks posed to homeowners and their property values by incarcerated people and their loved ones coming to the neighborhood. But can we shift that so people are also against the violence of criminalization and jailing? Not by coming in and demanding that everyone be abolitionists, but to go and do teach-ins about the various ways the jail wasn't in their or their neighbors' interests, to steer the neighborhood association away from only thinking about property values to highlighting the layered violence of jailing. And I think that that is a fascinating way to approach political education
Yes.
and organizing people in general too. What is it that people already know?
Yeah.
Or what is it that they think that they know? And what's their perspective? And can we leverage their NIMBYism, say, and add to their analysis that not only should this not be built in their backyard because they can identify the harms that are going to happen to them in their backyard, or the assumptions of harms that are going to happen to them in their backyard, but that it shouldn't be built at all.
Right.
And it's harmful to you and your neighborhood, or you perceive it to be, again. But ultimately, it's harmful to everyone who comes into contact with that system, which means we should be reducing that system rather than expanding it anywhere. And so using that NIMBYism as sort of a foot in the door to keep it open, to have the conversation, and push people to understand more broadly, you know, what are the assumptions that why this is bad for you, and then do you think that that applies beyond your backyard too?
Yeah.
And getting people engaged in that way, I think, is a fascinating and powerful approach.
Yeah, that's some great application. I think the power and importance of political education on the effectiveness on a lot of things, but on prison abolition work just can't be overstated, right?
Yeah.
When you hear an example like that. So that was really great. My application comes from Craig Gilmore and what he says to close out this incredible conversation, because I think he encapsulated the central takeaway from this entire conversation and all of the great examples, and we only touched on a few that they shared in this conversation. So he says to close out this piece, quote, "In each of these cases, the actual process of organizing helped groups of people trying to do certain things realize that prisons were an obstacle rather than part of a solution to the things they were trying to accomplish. This, in turn, amplified everybody's energy, looking around, listening, and thinking creatively about how to engage with their understanding of the issues that put them in motion. This is what we mean by mobilizing the already mobilized." And I had a moment where I pointed to my screen. I'm like, oh, it's the title of the piece. It's the title of the piece. But yeah, I think that's it. That's the work, and the incredible examples that they provided here are just great case studies and a role model and a map for how this work is possible in other places.
Yeah, absolutely. Great application. That was another option for me.
Yeah.
I had that highlighted too. This is a great example and a great encapsulation of the whole conversation. A great way to sum it up and close it out.
Right.
All right, well, let's talk about homework.
Okay.
What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? I'm going to try to find that abolitionist curriculum I mentioned earlier and look through that. We'll see. There's no reference to what the project was called or who these people were.
Yeah.
But I'll see what I can dig up.
Come on, power of Google.
And if I can't dig up this, I'll probably find something else that's really cool. So, either way, win-win. And of course, we've got to finish this series. We've got 2 more parts of this series left that are called Following the Money and Finding the Opportunity in Crisis. Ooh. So those are my pieces of homework. Let's finish this thing up and continue to learn from it. And also, let's find that abolitionist curriculum.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. What about you?
My homework is to look into the work of the Mid-City Neighborhood Organization and the Orleans Parish Prison Reform Coalition that you mentioned in your application. Because when I read that, I was like, I'm not familiar with these organizations and the work. And it sounds like they've done some incredible work that I would just love to learn more about. So I want to dig into that. And I totally agree with you. We've got to keep reading this series and continue to learn from Lydia, Judah, Craig, and Ruth and their conversations. It's just been so incredible to learn from them and through all of their experience, their rich experiences doing this work. And so, let's finish it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that's it for our conversation today. Damien, you're up next time. Yeah. What are you bringing to the table in our next episode?
Yeah, so I'm bringing our December book to the table for our next episode. Woo! The book is called Friends in Common, Radical Friendship and Everyday Solidarities by Laura C. Forster and Joel White. It was published by Pluto Press back in June of this year. And here's a description of the book on their website. Quote, "Friendship is full of revolutionary potential in the face of a profoundly antisocial capitalist system. Friends in Common explores friendship as a radical practice capable of upending hierarchies and producing social change. Friendship can transcend social boundaries and political borders. It is vital in building communities and underpinning solidarity. But its transformative potency ensures that it is heavily policed and restrained by the state. Understanding the radical possibilities of friendship can help us rethink our approach to family, work, and politics, and show us new routes to resistance and ways to open up spaces of solidarity and escape. And so if that description didn't get you, I don't know what will. It's a really great exploration of, and they've done such a great job so far. I'm not finished, but tying in history and other ways that we have, that our society and historians have thought about friendship and relationships and connections. And, they're really trying to provide this analysis around the power of friendship and in the work and the effect on us personally, but also really in the work that we're trying to do. So I'm really excited to finish the book and chat with you about it next time.
Yeah, it's a really great illustration of how powerful friendship can be.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I appreciated that you mentioned here in the description is the ways that the state knows how powerful it is, which is why they go undercover and try to infiltrate that way.
Yeah.
And really cause and create havoc amongst networks of people who are doing organizing work in some way, shape, or form. So it's a great book. I'm looking forward to talking with you about it.
Hey, and I'm glad you're my friend.
Yeah, glad you're my friend too. Been doing this for 5 years now.
Oh man, that's crazy.
Yeah. Almost, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, soon. Yeah.
Math. All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. We'll talk to you next week.